And this could be explained by the growth numbers we presented, that we see a decline in growth in the manufacturing sector or the industry sector. And this means lower employment, lower incomes, and so probably people have reduced their consumption, and as a result, tax revenues drop. In terms of expenditure side and why revenue underperformance has been a problem, partly it is because we have not adjusted our expenditures within the year in line with revenue performance. Most of the time, we see upward revisions in revenues, even when
pending bills with no provision. And you ask yourself, why should that be the case? If we have pending bills that have been audited, they have been verified and approved, why should we fail to have provision for those pending bills? And we have looked at the control of budget reports. The first half of the current financial year 24-25, pending bills at the national level stood at 706 billion. What would that translate into if the government was required to make a bullet payment? And remember, in the financial year 25-26, our development budget is 710 billion. So that means we would definitely suspend development and clear the pending bills. So we have to talk about this and hold the government to account and clear the pending bills. Then the other thing, Veronica has talked about the revenue numbers. In the draft BPS, government had projected a 3 trillion revenue. We raised that. It was brought down now to 2.8 trillion, the target. But surprisingly, expenditure was not touched. What does that tell us? We have a very jointed by only absorbing 49% of the budget. Industry, you absorb 49% of your budget, but you achieve 71%. Same with MSMEs development. Budget absorption 25, but the level of KPIs achieved 93%. Now, do these state departments offer project or offer budget but set fairly low KPIs? Because there's 93% of your KPIs. Okay, so what does that tell us? So can we conclude that the State Department for MSMEs development, can we say that it's so efficient, or this is an issue of a budgeting? And if that is the case, why should we continue to allocate more resources to such state departments? Because these are the same state departments we have flagged, okay? And now we as the resource allocation, and we say, for those state departments that they achieve them or not. And we have picked an example from the education sector. This is a state department for it shows a systemic to effectively deliver on infrastructure projects and that raises a urgent concern about resource allocation. And that is why we need specific pilot techniques to address some of these public administration and international relations sector, that is PAIR, we saw it had a budget cut of 8%. And you see, State House actually is set to receive a 75% increase in budget. But when you combine now the audit the audit is 204 billion. That gives us a 72% increase in the budget for the health sector. Then under the health sector, we have what we call the social protection in health. Social protection in health sector. Now we are 4 months since the operationalization of the social health authority. A benefits package and tariffs advisory panel, and the role of review and on fair pricing and tariffs for health services. We have the 7%. It was an increase, from the previous year, 22-23. in its allocation. With 0.8 billion that is 800 million allocation to $0.3 billion is set aside for 0.3 billion is set aside for 107,800 community 107,800 community health promoters. The health policy and regulation sub-program has seen a significant and explained increase from 94 million to 4.2 billion. We recommend inward and think how we can optimally use our resources as a country without necessarily having to appropriate money. Programs, or we can have a budget cut. Before I invite my colleague and country leader Daniel Dirab I want
what we want to achieve out of this discussion. Nights do not have the right spices. And as my colleagues are speaking, it just reflects back, because you ask yourself, we have this huge PFM reforms coming our way. But unless we fix the inefficiencies and the gaps, and one very critical component is that we not only look at the numbers from the forward reforms that we need to put in place. What are those things, reforms that we need to put in place? What are those things that need to be done, The key message that we can say as a group of citizens who are gathered here today, what can we call for? What can we call for in our fiscal consolidation, development pathways, and debt management? Budgetary.
Number two is that the revenues that the government was collecting, which was about 13% of GDP, was too low, and therefore needed to something needed to be done so that it could increase. Now we come to the government of Kenya. Those are the conditions. The response to that is that they have been working not to respond to the domestic economy, but to respond to the
only 48%, leaving 52% coming from out of pocket, from private sector, from external funding. So the most critical thing that done is to the contributions in a country like Kenya, where we have how are they going to enforce that? They said we are going to do what? Make sure.
I want to invite Honorable, this agitation is coming to you directly because you are visible and you are close range. We also want to take this to the committee, so please point us to the right direction. Karibuni, let's appreciate, applaud. Thank you. I then think that just the neighbor of the experts, then you are not so badly off. As you could have also noted, when Dr. Jaramba answered the question, that was asked around death. He's been very instrumental in what I'm doing in KU, and as I said, earlier, and I'm saying it because I see a lot of economists here coming pretty earlier around August, September. So I enrolled in KU, but also the time for you also came after 1.5 I enrolled in both master's degrees, one in public policy the other one in pure economics in UN, and I'm glad that I'm actually done with my coursework. We are now doing, I'm saying it, not in terms of boosting, but in terms of also encouraging any other public officer and also other young Kenyans that education, ukisoma haipotei, inasaidia pahali. As I start here, I start in terms of budget, but also as a leader, because I'm privileged to be MP for Kiharu. And you'll keep forgiving me because you know that is my primary role as the Member of Parliament for Kiharu. So when you invite me many often times and I start with what we are doing in Kiharu, is because that is exactly my job. And since we are talking about economics, an optimal allocation is in national and also in the taxonomies that exists, and especially constituencies and counties. The same semantics we are learning about here, they also happen in the constituency level. And I am glad that where I represent, that is Kiharu, our focus was primarily first in the learning institutions. It's a pretty large constituency with 2 sub-counties. We have over 112 public primary schools, and I want to assure you as the MP for that area and as a servant, having worked alongside the people of Kiharu and together, all our public primary schools, in all the classes the learners attend, they are in appearance just as the academies that the children of those who have more means attend, and actually all our public primary schools are tiled, all of them, all classes. We also have in the same category or sector a program we call Kiharu Masomo Bora, and Kiharu Masomo Bora touches on learning in secondary schools. And out of all our base secondary schools, over 10,000 learners. There used to be much more, but because now there is no, there was no intake in Form 1, they are now a little fewer. So they are around 10,000. They only pay 1,000 school fees per term. And in that they eat in school from Monday to Saturday. And in the same program, we also provide learning materials like revision books. And also we have done infrastructure. Like this year alone, we are doing 10 laboratories in our JSS, which are used to be primary schools institutions, modern laboratories, and much more that we are doing. So whatever we are doing here also must reflect on the leader in the area that they have dominant influence. And therefore, it is important that we speak about these things, because
the same things we are talking about here affect the people. The same thing we do in the constituency level affect the same people. And you could have also noted probably, because I highlight those things in my social media, rural constituencies have topographies that are not necessarily flat. And therefore what we have been doing from my first year is that in very steep areas, we do concrete roads, so that once you do it, you actually do it for once and for all. Once we, for example, the concrete roads we did in my first year, there has never been any repair needed, because once you do it, you have done it. Other than putting gravel on very steep areas, then you have to do it after every rainy season. Now getting to the issue of the day. I'm taking it up actually from there, from Kiharu, because, and actually don't wait for another technical speech. I'm already giving the speech. I learned one thing when I was elected as member of parliament for Kiharu in my first term. When you get elected and before people actually know your character, there is usually some friction before people define who you are. Because politics and leadership is also, to a large extent, part of making people know who you are, so that when you speak, they know who is speaking. When you say maybe something will be done, they know, do you mean it? So that when you say, people can define your leaning. And therefore, before that happens, or before that definition, of course, people will have different definitions on who you are. And I realized you can spend a lot of time fixing your politics and you neglect the role at which you are actually elected to do. That's something profound that I learned in my first 2 years. That you can spend a lot of time trying to fix your competitor, trying to fix and follow where the person whom you want your seat has gone to, trying to silence somebody maybe in social media or elsewhere, provoking you to do something better. Or you can actually choose to spend that time doing the work itself. And I realized it is very important that as a leader, you focus on something that can stand the test of time. Because, for example, when you have an argument with Dr. Rugo here, whom is also my good friend, if we have an argument here on words will not go past that argument. But if there is some deliverable, you do something tangible, it will go beyond the argument, it will go beyond words. And I realized that it is important you spend your time as a leader addressing the issues that are not necessarily things that you are proving through word of mouth, but things you will do that are all seasonal. And these that are all seasonal are the deliverables you do around the sectors that you should be working around. Why am I saying this? If you look at the budget alternative that has been done by IPF, and I commend Jerry for even the demeanor at which you highlighted the issues. If you look at it, and I want to be very frank, you have to make a choice as a country between managing politics and delivering. What am I trying to say? There is no better way of showing what you want to do other than through the budget allocations. Now, if what you want to achieve, for example, is roads, if what we want to achieve as a country is healthcare, if what we want to achieve is in education, then just follow the budget. Go check how much has been allocated. And therefore that will speak more than the words. Now, what I've seen, the state, the architecture of the state, beyond the doing, there is also the people management side. The people management side, of course, is done through that sector that was criticized by Bernard. That sector that has, of course, GJO, and also there is the administration. I don't want to say more, just scrutinize the budget. Because, for example, if you look at the supplementary budget we just did, there was a variation around administration again of over 10 billion shillings to one specific institution. Why am I saying these things? The orientation of a country, you need to define, we need to define. The orientation around the circumstances in Kenya now, are the real issues around security and management of people, or is it in other areas, for example, like roads and other deliverables? You just need to look at the budget, you can tell. Why am I saying so? If, for example, you increase the budget, let me use interior, for example, and you see a significant increment, and in that year there is no recruitment that is happening, and if you go to the budget of the development of that specific ministry, there is no increment that is notable, therefore that money is going into recurrent, then you ask yourself, this money that is going into recurrent in sectors that are by law not as transparent as others, then you need to make your deduction around there. And I'm speaking that because I know I'm talking to experts. You scrutinize. So when the money is going here, if it's, for example, buying equipment that are security related, fine, which are they? But if it's going to recurrent, what is recurrent in that sector? And up to what length can you question that recurrent as a Kenyan? Up to what length can you question that expenditure as a journalist, for example? You will get many answers from that. And I hope I am speaking. The other thing, because many times we confuse, budget making process is not just about June or whichever other date that the minister reads highlights. It starts pretty earlier. It starts many months before that date. And it goes all the way into oversight. And therefore, even IPF, I challenge you, some of the questions we are asking, I challenge you to also take it up. Because even, for example, if you look at KPIs, you look at the allocations, that's not the head of budget. Even what the Auditor General does is not the head of the budget. There is now what Park and Peak in Parliament, therefore, analyzes. I challenge you to also go the full length, so that we also check at the outcome at the end of the tunnel. It starts from way early, but it also ends way after June. Let's be able to check also the after implementation. If we say we have built a classroom, for example, can you verify through sampling those kind of projects? So it starts early. And just for understanding, we divide the state into 10 sectors. And those 10 sectors incorporate several ministries. So when you see, for example, those sectors that are 10, all the ministries are condensed, or all government departments are condensed, including sagas, into those 10 sectors. The other thing I just want to highlight is that my experience as chairman of budget is not the one we read. This is the hard truth. The budget of Kenya is called exchequer. The budget is not the one we read. The one we read remains there. When you have a country where there is a discrepancy between what you budget for and how much you can raise as revenue. So what we budget for is not the budget. What you fund is the budget. When you are in a household budget and you have what you want to achieve, you want to build a house in Githurai, you want to build your rural home, you want to buy a car, that is what is the budget. Then after that, those are aspirations. What can you fund out of your revenue? That is the real budget. So the things that I was seeing some semantics about absorption. That word called absorption, you need to actually juxtapose it from absorption to not funded. Those nice words about absorption and absorption, it basically means more than 95% that those programs were actually not funded by the close of the financial year. Those words around absorption, the problem is that the responsibility is left with the accounting officer the responsibility to explain. But the overarching ministry, which is the National Treasury, then is left with no responsibility. If you sit here and you're talking about an absorption, for example, in the Department of Basic Education, like the classrooms I saw in laboratories, if there is a CFO or the PS for basic education, they seem like the ones carrying the burden, that you didn't absorb the money yet it was budgeted. That is not the truth. The truth is that that program or those projects were actually not funded. So that I have seen part of managing our country's economics is communicating this as they are, so that people's expectations are aligned to what can be delivered and are aligned to what is possible. There are just a few other things I want to highlight. One is the budget. The budget that we know in terms of the expenditure side. If you could have followed the presentation here, DPS level 4.3 trillion. Let me use the one that has been implemented, because, and you forgive me for this because I've been there. The real budget is the one that has been implemented, not the one you want not the aspirations of the next financial year. And that comes in handy at the close of the financial year, when you realize there is a lot of gap in terms of revenue. Now let me actually use the one that has partly been implemented for this current financial year. And let me use the one before revision, before the second supplementary. You're talking about a budget of 3.8 trillion. I want you to see what it is that we budget for. Kenya has two very stagnant and solid pillars in budget making. One is the side of discretionary, the other one is non-discretionary. As the institutions of the state continue to solidify, what usually happens is that the role of a leader gets diminished by the day. The role of budget making organs gets diminished the more institutions of governance continue to solidify. Let me try to explain this. In a country like Kenya that is doing fairly well in terms of having enough institutions around governance, that continues to decimate the role of decision making in resource allocation. Why? Majority of the huge proportion of our budget is actually non-discretionary. There is nothing you can do about it. So you are sitting there as the leader, championing or leading budget making, but up to what point can you exercise your mind? This is the reason. 3.8 trillion is there as your budget. You read it, is an astronomical figure, and it projects even growth in expenditure, etc. All those good semantics we put in the budget making process. But out of 3.8 trillion, you remove 1.25 to 1.3 trillion as something called consolidated fat service. I'm not using BPS, I'm using this current financial year. Out of that 1.25 trillion, over 1.08 trillion is money you're going to pay interest rates for debts. 1.008 trillion. It will be more next financial year. Now, there is nothing you can do about that. There is also nothing you can do about funding constitutional bodies and commissions, and there is nothing you can do about pension. All those falls under CFS. So you budget 1.2 thereabout trillion, there is nothing you can do about it. Then come to salaries of civil servants. Salaries of civil servants in Kenya is in the range of 600 to 700 in the few years around here now, 600 to 700 billion Kenya shillings. There is also nothing you can do about that. There is a constitutional requirement of funding counties to a tune of 380 billion that time. This financial year, actually without carryovers. Once you put carryovers, it is over 400 billion. There is nothing you can do about that also. So what happens then? We end up with a kitty we call development budget of around 700 billion, which over the years, as I said when I was starting, is just an aspiration. It is not a budget, it is an aspiration. Because you budget 700 billion, by the course of the financial year, you are less in revenue collection by 300 billion. You can't cut payment of interest rate. Neither can you cut any part of CFS. You can't cut salaries. There is a part you can't cut, for example, FPE. Part of recurrent, for example, is free basic education. There is nothing you can do about that. So what usually happens? When Treasury receives money, revenue, they fund all those things, other things as priority. The last one to be funded is development. So in that development then, it is the one that takes the hit and the cut when there is a downsize or a downgrade in revenue collection. So the room to exercise the authority of budget making process continues to be decimated. For me, in one way, it's a good thing, especially in regards to what this money goes into doing. But of course, as I wind up, I'll talk more about also the revenue side. Nachukua a few points here and there. I'm talking broadly, so please don't get lost in the mix. I'm just trying to be broad and general. This financial year, as you do the alternative budget, this and next, you likely see a lot of enhancement in GJRO, because maybe 1 year after today, or even months after today, we are likely to see a lot of activities around IEBC. It is a huge budget expectation there, because we are talking about around 60 billion Kenya shillings that must go into the instruments of democracy, into making sure you have a credible election in the year of election, which is not very far from today. Now, why have I picked just IEBC? Even with the challenges that there are in terms of funding the current budget, the budget we are likely to give IEBC during the electioneering period is actually more than the entire budget we give to the road sector in Kenya when you talk about development funded by GOK. So I want you to start exercising your mind around your expectations then. I have talked about non-discretionaries you can't do anything about. There is now another non-discretionary called IEBC that will take approximately 60 billion. So what is that doing? It continues to shrink what you may call political development. As an MP, as a politician, you may talk about all the other things. Before you talk about roads and water, you have not yet said anything about development. Because the people's expectation in terms of Kenya is around those areas. Let me say something about debt. If there is one threat that we face as a country today, it is debt. And I don't think we are taking the seriousness of this matter the way it should. And I also don't think those who are responsible are communicating enough about the problem we have about debt. When you are in a hole, there are many ways you can get out of that hole. You can get a ladder, you can get somebody to pull you from it. There are many ways. One of the ways you cannot get out of the hole is to continue digging that hole. You know, I just want you to reflect on the figures that were projected here. You tell me whether Kenya continues to get out of the hole or to dig the hole further. And I think in terms of debt management, we have a lot of work to do as a country. And the government also has a lot of work to do around debt management. If you track debt from year 2003, especially during President Kibaki's time, he took up the country when the debt was around 600 billion shillings. By the time he left, it was around 1.8 trillion. But I want you to see the other side of it. When President Kibaki came in, revenue collection in Kenya was 200 billion. Can you just imagine how small a country we were? We were collecting only 200 billion in ordinary revenue. When President Kibaki left, that figure was around or close to 1 trillion Kenya shillings. So if you look at the debt growth, the debt grew from 600 to 1.8 trillion. That's around maybe 200% over and above. But look at the revenue collection. The revenue collection, the growth was like double that of debt accumulation. And I want to say, because figures don't lie, you realize that the accolades given to President Mwai Kibaki, he actually deserves more. Because now we have comparisons to do. When it was just President Kibaki's reign, there was no comparative analysis to do. Now he left in 2013. We can now do comparative analysis from then, and clearly you can see Kenya has never had a more prudent president than President Mwai Kibaki. And it is the same time we had very revolutionary expenditure lines like basic education funding and all the others, that even beyond being good in terms of growth of the economy, they also are social investments, because they enhance an egalitarian society. All of us here in this hall, I can bet over 80% will not be in this hall were it not for the reforms around education during that time or regime of President Mwai Kibaki. Why am I talking about that in this kind of standness? We are now talking about 10 trillion to 11 trillion depending on where the currency is, because 50% is denominated by a currency, not other currencies, not ours. Now, if you take our debt to GDP levels, and I want to agree with Bernard, this is what happens when you are making a budget. You have to address the issues in your country, but I have also seen we are not as sovereign as we purport to be. Developing countries are not as sovereign as it appears, because when you are doing revenue raising measures, for example, some of those things are conditions from people you want to borrow money from, without mentioning the exact ones. I can see in your faces you already know them. So are we together? Ama nipuguze hii maneno ya economics ya kiasi. I'm looking for words for you to capture this point properly. I'm talking about debt. If you look at our debt level, 10 to 11 trillion, and I'm trying to solidify the point that was said earlier, you'll be given a condition about debt to GDP ratio. You'll also be given a condition around fiscal deficit to GDP ratio. If you notice there, GDP is cutting across both two parameters. So what do authorities do? Because the target is on a percentage. If I do 2 out of 10, 2 out of 10 is what? 2 over 10 is 20. 2 over 10. 2 divided by 10 What's that? 20%. Very well. What about when I do 2 out of 20? 10%. What have I changed? Have I changed? Is the 2 constant? What have I changed? What if my obligation was to lower the percentage? What do I need to do around the denominator? Now, ask yourself this. You report in the same government documents, the Kenyan GDP grew by 4.something%. That goes in the record. The same record shows the GDP moved from 16 trillion to 18 trillion. What is that percent? Can somebody do 16 out of 18? I mean, do the math. When GDP moves from 16 to 18, what percentage is that? That is 2 out of 16. 12.5. Okay, they will argue one is real, the other one is nominal. You can even discount inflation out of it. So I want you to see, so that even as you work around the figures you work on as IPF and also the fourth estate, you are able to get the reality by yourself. Because if the economy has grown by 10%, then it should reflect also on the GDP side, which you calculate in, or you used to calculate the other parameters, but should also be the one reported by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and all the other government bodies. I hope I'm making sense. You don't need anyone to tell you the economy of Kenya grew by what percent. You can calculate it by yourself in nominal terms and in real terms, because you have all the parameters from public institutions. So the problem around our debt is that when we inflate our denominator, we continue to show like the economy grew with the purpose of having a leg room of borrowing more. The problem is that you cannot teach figures for too long. It catches up with you, and especially when it is time for repayment. Debt management is everything else. It catches you around repayment. Now, we are spending over 1 trillion Kenya shillings in paying our interest rates. Over 1 trillion Kenya shillings. Now, whether you inflate GDP or you condense it, that is actual money that actually have to be paid. That is where it catches you. Because you may come and say, you know, our fiscal deficit to GDP ratio is 5% or the next, or the other figure. That's fine, it goes to the books. It will catch up with you when it's time for repayment. The other things I want you to, I'm just provoking your mind so that you go research further. I saw headlines in our newspapers the other day in jubilation that we have done a very good thing, because in that year of 20, I think last year or thereabout, we were able to repay our Eurobond. And the people in this hall, because I can see you are able to dig deeper. You talk about in jubilation of having been able to pay the Eurobond of 2014. And it comes out as headline as a jubilation for the country. Now this is the reality. The reality is that you retire a debt of 6.8% with a debt of 10.3%, and then you clap and you want the whole country to be closed for people to celebrate. I'm provoking all of us here. I mean, Kenya is for all of us, and we need to speak these things as clearly as they ought. You cannot go and take a loan from Shylock, you pay a bank, and then you go home, and people should celebrate you for taking a loan with an interest of 20% to pay the one you had that you are paying 12%. Those are the things that will catch up with this country very soon. And by the way, with all honesty, if we do not become more prudent in the several months to come, we are likely to have a very big problem with our debt. Why? If in our revenue collection, over 40% is going into interest rate alone of debt obligations, what are we talking about? The other thing I want us to reflect on around debt, and the reason why this, and I'm challenging even those who are responsible in government to speak about it clearly, because part of this communication is important. You collect revenues of around 2.4 trillion shillings. You use over 1.2 trillion in paying interest rates of debt incurred. So that's 50% that you can do nothing about. Basically what we are doing as a country, the money we are borrowing in terms of PFM Act, you should be borrowing for development alone. But even by doing the math even with a pencil, if we take our revenue collection, you remove CFS, you remove salaries, you are already in red. It means the money we borrow, some of it is for budget support, and clearly that money is for recurrent. You don't need to go very far. Just this data, just do the math around this data, even with a pencil, you'll get the correct figure. So this issue of debt, if we are not progressive enough and prudent enough as a country, in just a few months to come, we will see the ramifications. We do not want Kenya to be a case study like Sri Lanka in the year 2002, in the year 2022, 2023. The primary reason was debt. The issue around Zambia never descended too much because there was a new president who had to tell their country as it is, and they restructured, or they started or attempted to restructure. Ghana never had that luxury. They actually defaulted. Now, if you receive 2 shillings and 1 shilling is already going into interest rates of debt incurred in terms of interest rate, and the other shilling remaining cannot pay even the recurrent expenditure, I mean, there is work to be done there. And I'm saying it so that we provoke our mind, we think, not with the aim of just talking, but also providing a solution to it. Therefore, you must have seen sometime last week, I saw the National Treasury had put up some communication which was recanted very fast about a visit to China. Visits to China currently or other bilaterals, I can assure you, will be about debt primarily. Because we are almost at a cliff in terms of debt repayment, and especially interest rate. The problem is that when you go to your creditors to discuss about either rescheduling debt or working around new terms, what are you telling the markets? When I am here, I have borrowed 3 of you some money, 10,000, 12,000, 18,000. I have your money now, so you expect me to pay you. You see, as my sister there, I've already called my brother here to tell him, you know, I was to pay you this money, but forgive me, you may have to add me a few more months for me to pay you this money. What am I already telling you? As the other person, I owe money. I've already called you as a person who owes you money. I mean, najaribu kuondoa economy kwa hii maneno mingi. Martin is here. Dilango is there. And Veronica. All of you have lent me money. Veronica 12,000, Dilango 10, and Martin 18,000. Yani, mmenikopesha. Mnaelewa hiyo maneno? Niko hapa. Martin ako hapa, ameona nimeita Dilango. Nimemwambia, najua niko na pesa yako na nilikuwa nikulipe next month. lakini sasa nataka tuongee. What comes to your mind as Veronica? Are you getting what I'm trying to say? Any talk you start around debt, changing terms, you already communicate to the markets. If you look at the figures, the yield of our Kenyan Eurobond, even as late as yesterday, you see changes there. Because markets operate on credible and fundamental information. When the market starts sensing that somebody owes you money, you're already talking to them, not asking them which bank account they should pay you through, but asking you, can we, tunaweza fanya unipe miezi kidogo kiasi nini. When they start seeing you already giving signals to one of your creditors that you want changes in terms, you are already communicating signals to the market. And those signals in the market is actually how countries then decide. Because what usually happens when you give signals that you have problems to paying debt, the international market starts to sense you as somebody who may also change terms when they lend you money. So what do? They already input that risk in the interest rate they will charge you. That is why you see the yield of our Kenyan Eurobond is changing. Because when the creditors start seeing, you may start some stories sometime later in the future, they also price you accordingly. So they let you money fine, but you also pay a commensurate cost for it. Now the other thing I want you to look at is this. You can talk to China and they agree. China, you know, people imagine China is the #1 lender to Kenya. No, that's not true. The Kenyan debt to Kenya, the Chinese debt to Kenya is actually less than 10%. It's only that Chinese debt is usually project finance, which is more expensive, and commercial. So they become more expensive. But there are some other parameters I provoke you to go and check. Out of our CFS, payments of interest rate of 1 trillion, approximately. 750 billion this current financial year. It is now over 800 billion. The one we budgeted was 750. I think is now hovering around 800 billion by close of the year. But let me use 750. Please get this point. 1 trillion shillings is for payment of interest rate. 750 billion is for domestic debt servicing. So external debt, we are talking about around 200 billion shillings. There is a point I want to derive there. Now, issues around talking about debt. You know, when I'm talking about debt, I'm talking about changing terms, because I am sure 100% we may end up there as a country. So when you talk about changing terms of debt, you may change externally. Now come now back home. 750 billion is the biggest ticket of payment of interest rate in our country, in our economy. Now, can you start thinking as a Kenyan what that is? Can you imagine a meeting being called by the National Treasury at some point? Like the way we are here, there is a meeting that has been convened. Nimewaita tuongee mambo ya hii deni, sio kama wa Kenya, lakini wale watu wamekopesha serikali pesa. I want you to start seeing that conversation, what it means. The 750 billion Kenya shillings we are paying domestic interest rate is owed to who? Is owed to banks, is owed to insurance companies, is owed to bond holders, even normal Kenyans. Now, changing terms means what? Are you calling us to increase the yield? What is the likely conversation that is likely to be around there? Is about postponing paying you, that's number one. They can only be two things actually. Postponing paying you, that's number one, or paying you less. Now think about it this way. You are a bank with shareholders expecting you to release results by end of the financial year. Huyo mtu anasema nini akikuita hiyo mkutano, in other words? Those are the things that we need to think about, because the dominant thing we have to think about as a country is debt. And I can guarantee you, we can do all the other things correct. Any small indication that we are not able to service is catastrophic more than any other thing we are doing as a country. I think I'll leave that there. What I'm trying to say. And you know, they say restructuring is the first chapter of default, because the same analogy I gave, if I owe you money, 3 of you, and I've called you one to talk, what are we talking about? We are talking about, I may not pay you next month, I'll pay you 3 months from now. So I'm restructuring. So what if in those 2 months I've not paid you, what have I done? Haven't I defaulted? Now lastly, I want to talk about revenue. There is something called revenue maximizing tax rate. That is a term that should be given a department in the Department of the National Treasury. Revenue maximizing tax rate. You know, many times you confuse that you add tax rate, you get more revenue. It is a fallacy. At some point you get to rough as curve and it starts descending. That the more you increase, the more you distort economic decisions. So if I was to buy a car, I see you've already paying for my money, so I hold back that expenditure. Holding back that expenditure means even the return you could have gotten, you will not get it. That is something I have seen we have also to take very seriously as a country. So that even as we make tax policies and revenue policies, let's look, and it cannot be arbitrary. I mean, you cannot just sit down and say, now tunapeleka hii kodi hapa, you get more money. There has to be some research based on it. There has to be some data analysis based on it. There has to be data sampling. There has to be data work in it by coming up with a rate that maximizes revenue without making people distort their economic decisions or a market to distort its decision making. We did the finance bill of 2023, which was fairly debated as the one for last year. Now, this is the most shocking thing. The Kenyan revenue to GDP ratio in the year 2023-2024 was around 16%. I want you to see the trend. In the year 2019-2020 was around 15%. In the year 2023, that year, was 14 point something percent. In this current year up to date, it is around 14.7%. Now, when you do robust revenue raising measures in terms of policy, they should come with commensurate revenue from it. Kodi ikiongezewa, for example, pay, there should be commensurate revenue in the basket of revenue from this money you have taxed. Tunashikana hapo. Why is it that even when you raise the rate, then in the basket of money there is not that money? Why is it that the revenue growth in Kenya never noticed finance bill of 2023? That the graph, if you are given a graph without labeling, you will not pinpoint those 2 years. You will not see them because the revenue never changed other than the ordinary changes it usually has. I'm talking about that analysis of revenue maximizing tax rate. Why is it that even when we have a very corrosive, when we have a very debatable policy around tax and it passes, why is it that we cannot see this money in the other side? Possibly this could be the reason. You come, maybe you are earning some money here, the government takes it at the payee level. Napenda kuita unakatia stima kwa transformer. You know, when money is deducted from your payee, ni kama stima imekatiwa kwa transformer. So it actually never reaches your hands. Now when you cut money from the payee level, when you cut money at that level, let's say in my disposable income, you already knock off 8,000 shillings from it. That is the money you are sending your uncle somewhere in Nyamira. That is the money you are sending your auntie somewhere in Kisii. Now, you no longer send them that money. So they no longer buy that sugar they were buying through the transfer you are doing. So you have cut money here at the payee level, but the same money denies you correction at the VAT level. Those are some of the things you have to work around, so that even as we increase taxes, then we are not handicapping the same revenue collection. There is another thing I want to talk about very briefly, which you have to be vigilant as a country. In Nigeria is one of the economies, by the way, which are very good. It has very rich people in terms of, in Africa, you only get black billionaires, majority of them being domiciled in Lagos, Nigeria, out of Nigerian money. Now, Dangote cement, BUA cement, they grew around what? You come and put in some duty for imports of the commodities they manufacture, primarily cement. By that time, when you put duty on cement, I'm using Nigeria, you end up having a big conglomerate and several of them. Number one, of course, we know Dangote cement, BUA cement, there is also Lafarge and the others. So now you cut off imports. It's a good thing, fine. The question is, for how long? You cutting off meaning you build a wall of tariff, not necessarily a non-tariff barrier, but a tariff one. So you put in a wall. This wall should incentivize this local production to be efficient, so that their products can compete with the global ones. But then you overstay with that policy. So Nigeria, by beginning of this year, had the highest cement prices in Africa. Can you see that oxymoron? The biggest producers had the highest cement prices in Africa and had the highest cement margins almost in the world. You protect an industry that must come in with an analysis for how long, and there should be government follow-up on when we protect you, up to when can Kenyans continue to pay more for you to get efficient. Because I am here as a consumer in Kenya. The cement prices in Kenya today have gone up. So what am I doing as a Kenyan buyer of cement? I am actually subsidizing as a Kenyan the production of the producer of cement. I am paying a higher price. It is a good thing. It may end up employing many more Kenyans. But the reason for protectionism must not be for longevity of production in this company. It should be up to the point where this company gets competitiveness in competing with any other cement from any other country. If I can import cement, let's say from Mozambique, I'm just using an abstract example, or from South Africa. If I can import a bag of cement from South Africa and it gets to Taita Taveta at a lower price than the cement being produced several kilometers away from that place, I mean, that's also a paradox. Protectionism all along must not be for the benefit of the producer. It must be for the benefit of the economy, and that is why it has to be time-bound. Very lastly, some of the things I think we should do as a country. Number one is to take institutional reforms very seriously. If you look at the regression of economic growth from China, from all the other countries, institutional reforms takes up a sizable influence on the dynamics of economic growth. Sio kupaka mafuta. You know, in Kenya we come rebrand an agency and we call it institutional reform. We need to be very deliberate. Institutional reform must incorporate the size of government. Kenya can act optimally with half of the government we have in terms of its size. We can cut the government into half across everything. Government, if government is a loaf of bread, you can cut it by half. All the resources of government, you can cut it by half, and my grandmother will not notice. What am I trying to say? That service delivery will not be hampered. Institutional reform must be deliberate and must be objective. The other thing, the Eurobond we borrowed, for example, the one I talked about, 10% to retire the 6.8%, we borrowed around 30% higher price to pay another one. I wish we did a few things instead of borrowing more. Kenya has got assets, and some of these assets we bought them for commercial purpose alone. Government invests in institutions for many factors, strategic reasons. There is also commercial reasons. In the year 2020, Safaricom market capitalization was around 1.5 trillion Kenya shillings. 1.5 trillion. The government of Kenya owns 35% of Safaricom. 20% of that Safaricom at the market cap then of 1.5 trillion is 300 billion. Only 30% alone. You could have raised 300 billion without borrowing anything. But some people will argue, but you know, why would you sell it? It gets dividend. I mean, even in the investment arena itself, you take the amount of money the government cumulatively has received in dividends. It may need to receive dividends for hundreds of years for it to match this kind of investment. The other thing people talk about, you can't sell a company like Safaricom. You know, it holds very strategic reasons for our country. Which strategic reasons cannot be handled? And that regulator can hold the forte of government there. You can even have a regulation that the government will have board of directors without necessarily even having a shareholding. You can have it. Just as currently the CBK forces banks, you must have independent directors. The government will not own your bank, but they'll force you, you have to have independent directors. The government can still control companies through regulation. You don't have to control companies through ownership and stake. Now this is the thing. Now that market capitalization of Safaricom has now come down from 1.5 trillion to 700 billion as of yesterday. We must be strategic even in government investments so that we make it we have an efficient asset management arm of government so that we are able to make optimal decisions. Why would you go to borrow money as a government private sector investment? invest. You are not hungry. You are okay. You are not maybe even Kenyan. So you have a home by the beach. You have money. I want to ask a rhetorical question. Between this person who has 10 billion shillings, then they are okay, they have a house, they are able to take care of themselves, but they have 10 billion, they want to invest in Kenya. Is this fine? Wewe uko na gari yako, hata uko na ndege, unakaa ng'ambo, you are not even Kenyan. You live in the most exotic places and you have money and you want to invest. So you are not looking for money to buy food. You are actually looking for money just as a creation of wealth. And you have some money to put up a factory somewhere and you say to it is in Kenya. And when, or any other developing country, when you come in with this money and you are investing in Kenya, somebody want to treat you like helping you is a favor they are doing you. Entrepreneurs, if they are given the primacy of the role that should be given to them, they can do much of the work that the government already does, and therefore take up some more roles from government, for government to concentrate on just a few. If you look at, for example, the R&D budget of Amazon, it is bigger. Research and development is a big budget in developed countries. The R&D budget of Amazon is higher than the R&D budget for the entire Germany. Germany as a country has a lower R&D budget than Amazon as a country. Just imagine if Amazon was not there. The R&D budget of Meta, for example, and maybe only two tech companies in the US combined, is higher than the entire R&D budget of the government of the United States. What am I trying to say? There are some things that are already being funded by the private sector in that country where the government does not actually need to have that money in their fiscals. Because the ultimate result of R&D is research, is to do things more efficiently, is to do things better. If private sector is given enough resources, enough support, they can end up doing much more of what the government does. Asanteni sana.
Right, thank you very much for the economics class, Honorable Ndindi. That was very useful. I hope you have all enjoyed. We now want to move to the last step of this launch. Just play that short video and then we can move forward to the rest of the day. Please indulge us in the next couple of minutes. This was supposed to happen to some of us here, so we can make it aware. Yeah, thank you. Right, is it, oh, it's still going on? Okay.
Every year, a national budget is tabled, promises are made, numbers are crunched, but beneath the numbers, what do the figures mean for you? In this 5th edition of the annual National Shadow Budget, we have crunched the numbers and highlighted the following. We note that Kenya has remained resilient in the face of domestic civil unrest and external shocks. However, revenue shortfalls continue to hamper fiscal consolidation efforts. High interest payments and debt have contributed to high debt fragility and the risk of high debt distress. The question that lingers is, how will the government finance the 4.3 trillion shillings budget in the coming year? The government has proposed some reforms, but challenges persist. Firstly, the government has emphasized the entrenching of a zero-based budgeting approach. We wait to see how this shift will influence government spending decisions. Second, the urgent and critical clearance of national government pending bills amounting to 540 billion shillings is necessary to ease cash flow pressures on the private sector. Third, the persistent duplication of functions across national and devolved governments and with national government entities demands rationalization. Fourth, declining foreign aid, especially to the health sector, has left a funding gap of 28 billion shillings. This creates the need for innovative financing and resource optimization. Lastly, there has been reorganization and merging of parastatals, and it is imperative to assess how these realignments affect budget execution, staff deployment, and service delivery. We call upon all citizens to interact with the analysis and oversight institutions, especially Parliament, to leverage on these insights presented when considering the budget proposal. Kindly visit our website on www.ipfglobal.or.ke and download your copy of the annual National Shadow Budget.
One more round of applause as we appreciate our chief guest, as we celebrate the publication that is now accessible and available for all of us. So I would like to welcome Sarita to just take 1 minute for a vote of thanks, and then our guest to just hold on for a few minutes for photo ops, then we will close the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Sarita Kenya, and I serve as the Programs and Operations Associate at the Institute of Public Finance. And I'm just honored to give the vote of thanks on behalf of IPF this morning. And first and foremost is to just thank each and every one of you for joining us to witness the launch of our 5th edition of the annual Shadow Budget. Not only have you graced this event, but your presence also reaffirms the value of evidence-based dialogue in shaping Kenya's public finance. So just to mention the people in the room, our distinguished guests, Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, MP Kiharu Constituency, Member of Budget and Appropriations Committee, Mercy Mwangi, the Executive Director of KEWAPA, our sector experts, who I will just name one of them, Stephen Jaramba, Engineer James Murage, Jim Kambuni, John Nyangi, Dr. Patricia Mukabi, Francis Xavier, Dr. Vincent Nunu, Dr. Aaron Pegea, Janet Ouko. Thank you so much for that. Our partners, Budgetary Hub, World Vision, Christian Aid, ASNET, TISA, Oxfam, Hyatt, members of the Fourth Estate, fellow IPF colleagues, friends of IPF, thank you all for being here this morning, and just thankful for your unwavering commitment to transparency, accountability, and inclusive governance. I also want to thank the Hyatt Regency Hotel for just creating this space for us so we can engage in such a powerful conversation. So thank you all for coming and for being here. We ask that we can move to the photo session just over here. And yes, I think the full breakfast is being served. So have a good day and God bless you all.
Naitwa kabisa hizo sijui ni za nani. Kumbe ni hao watu.